The Nigerian film industry is the second most prolific film industry in the world, and their faith-based films that they label as evangelical theme films are not fringe like ours, they're mainstream. Today my guest is Nollywood scholar Dr. Elizabeth Olayiwola in the second episode of my multi-part series on Nollywood.
Welcome to the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast, where only the foolhardy and headstrong dare to venture. For within these humble halls you may find your heart stirred to join the ranks of a Christian film movement, to storm the world with God-glorifying media. But be forewarned, this undertaking will lead you down a perilous road of hardship and scorn. And so, if you're committed to pursue this life of woe, brave soul, I now leave you to your resolute guide, writer and director, Todd Schaefer.
There's a lot we Christian filmmakers can learn from Nigerian filmmakers and their industry. They provide us with a model that I believe is better suited to our faith-based genre than the Hollywood model. We'll always have the Hollywood model, and there's always going to be Christian filmmakers who follow and produce films based upon that model. But there is so much more Christian filmmakers can be doing if we just learn from other cinematic cultures and film industries. Throughout cinema history, revolutionary filmmakers innovate their way out of the status quo, and they shake up the stagnation of soul that sets in when filmmakers get complacent, serving a creatively fearful industry. That's just one lesson we can learn from the Nigerians. And here's something else. Nigeria has a population of 214 million people. Half of them identify as Christian, and 80 million belong to the church. This Christian audience accounts for the dominance of Christian-themed films in an industry that rivals the United States, where any film that smacks of Christian faith in any degree is on the fringe. The U.S. has a population of 334 million. 75% identify as Christian. That's a Christian audience of about 240 million. That's more than double that of Nigeria. Our economic power and potential audience is much greater than Nigeria, and yet our Christian film industry lags far behind their evangelical movement. Our guest is Dr. Elizabeth Olayiwola, a Nollywood scholar and a film lecturer at Kwara State University in Nigeria. Her research focuses on evangelical Nigerian films, and that's what she's here today to talk to us about. This is episode 53. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting what you are doing. I've gone through some of those podcasts myself, and I find it educating. I said to myself, I'll refer back to this because it's good to know what other Christian film industry are doing, especially in Hollywood, in America. So,
yeah. Since we don't know anything about the Nigerian film industry, give us a picture of what that looks like.
I'd like to start with probably, let's say, the first encounters that the Nigerian audience had with film. So I think it's dated way back to the colonial times, the colonial film unit, and then they would bring some of the films from London would come to Nigeria, mainly screening about things like probably good sanitary practice, or just documentaries that I think would educate the people. Then over time, in those you have indigenous people who became filmmakers, and their origin would trace it mainly to the Nigerian theater practice, which was a big thing. The Nigeria, especially the West, in the West, is the western part of Nigeria. You have a lot of theatrical activities going on. You have traveling theaters. You have full-blown cultural activities that people see for entertainment. So we had the cultural life, of course, entertainment, all of those going on, but not cinema. And then as technology became big, in Nigeria, then the theater artists began to use that medium to circulate same content, their same kind of production, but they would now shoot it and then come back to London to make it out to something that the audience could see. So that's the beginning of indigenous filmmaking in Nigeria. Then came the 80s with the poor economy and then the structural adjustment. So it became very difficult for filmmakers to go through the whole route of producing celluloid film. Going to London became very expensive to get these films out. And in the mid 80s, down to late 80s, this same filmmakers started experimenting with the VHS technology because it's cheaper, easier. So, and then eventually, in I think early 90s, that became the boom. They made a success out of VHS, and then it was widely accepted by the Nigerian audience, not for the sophistication, but for the content. People could relate with the kind of stories that the filmmakers told, and that was it for the audience. I remember that a scholar, Onokome said that any cinema that can relate with its audience will thrive. And I think basically that was what the Nollywood did, so just relating with the audience. The content was so much everyday street, either street rumor or everyday street reality, would come into the show. And that became the connection for the audience. As at that time, you also have some of these B-rated Hollywood films coming into the cinemas, and the elites would prefer to see that at first compared to the locally produced films because of the quality difference and that. But you have the popular audience would be the middle class, the everyday street people would identify more with the locally produced films. And then I think that went on and on until Nollywood became so big and accepted across the classes of people that there is. So that's like a startup, for how
that takes us up to today then.
Yes, so that's just like a general background to how we got here.
So are DVDs still being distributed in Nigeria?
It's dwindling, but a little. So now people are big on online streaming, cable. I think online streaming is taking over cable. Some people can't tell you when last they recharge for their cable. They pay subscriptions for the cable, but the smartphone is the thing now. So you see people all over in the buses, anywhere, just streaming things, either on Netflix or YouTube. Yes. So online streaming is really taking over. But the DVD market used to be a big market, used to be a big market. But
it used to be big here too. So you may be like a few years behind us in terms of the transformation into the streaming technology.
Yes, I think so, because with the COVID, a lot happened with streaming. Shortly before COVID, cinema was still it. People would still prefer to go to the cinema for all of the social activities that tag along the screening itself. But with COVID, I think majority became forced to love the small screen. So before COVID, it was not a big screening on small screen was not a big thing with the Nigerian audience. They would rather see the bigger screen. But I think COVID forced us into that. Because before COVID, there was this argument about theater dying. And then I remember that somebody wrote this article.
Can you give me any insight on how the film industry in Nigeria got to be the third largest producer of films in the world in the last 20 years?
Surprisingly so. I think that took everybody by surprise. But looking back at the history, I think I would say that one of the reasons why we're able to produce this much it's because we had an industry that's not so much regulated. You could just pick up your camera today and then become a filmmaker. There are no tight regulations with getting into that industry.
Yeah.
People would mainly learn as apprentice. You go join some of these directors and then you work with them for a while, and then if you can if you can convince somebody that this is a good market, let's make this film, then you can get money and you shoot. You probably make some profit or not, but the film is out there
Yeah.
already. And then I think mainly it's because of the technology that we use is easy to use, easy to learn.
Mm-hmm.
From the era of the Nollywood itself now, that's from 1992 that people would refer to as Nollywood, Nollywood. That's just the break in that VHS technology. So I guess if it was still the celluloid, you'd probably would have less people producing, because it would be so expensive to produce. You would need a lot of technical knowledge, and that would already cut off some people. So I think the kind of growth that this industry has experienced is mainly because people could access the industry freely, and then it's cheap, relatively cheap to produce, and you have this large audience who would consume. Nigerians love their content. They love their stuff, kind of thing. So Nigerians love their content, and so they would just you have a readily supporting audience who would see this work. So that contributed to the kind of production.
It largely came because of technology making things easier, having a very motivated audience that wants to see content produced for them that they can relate to, and it's thriving because there's not an industry that was set up that's like a gatekeeper. Like in the United States, the big studios tend to be gatekeepers, and things tend to be very expensive. And so that tends to be prohibitive, which it sounds like in Nigeria you don't have quite that hurdle to overcome.
Yes.
So how do they get into distribution and getting their films? Is there like a big film market that they submit things to, or is it easy to find distributors?
Yes, I think during the VHS/DVD time, you had this strong marketers association, mainly in Lagos, mainly in Alaba. So the filmmakers would approach them, and then sometimes they talk before production, because the marketers would probably say, if you want us to market these, you have to get some A-list actors to be in that film, and give some conditions. The marketers became so big that they would sometimes dictate the kind of content. They would tell you, this is the story that sells. So we had basically like a formula going on, and then you have a lot of stories replicated around that formula. This is what sells. We are going to market it, to do this. And then so during the VHS time, it was mainly in Lagos. The distribution happened in Lagos. There's this market, Alaba market, very famous for distributing DVDs. And then at some point, I think they loan money to filmmakers too. So that kind of encouraged the filmmakers to make once you have a successful one, and then the next one they could loan you money to make the films. So, but up from then with the revival of the cinema, in the 80s, the cinemas mainly packed off because it could not run itself, and then interestingly, okay, I'll get back to that. But interestingly, most of these cinemas were sold out to churches, and eventually these churches started using the cinema halls as exhibition, but I'll get back to that when I'm talking about the evangelical film making itself. So, up from the DVD market, the revitalization of cinemas, and then we had more corporate bodies investing into cinemas, and then so some some filmmakers, of course, who felt cheated by the marketers, started trying the cinemas, and then the cinema became the elitist culture. People from the upper middle class would rather go to the cinema, while
Mm.
people on the street would still stick to their DVDs. They would watch it in video parlors,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where you could rent those films, and then just see them on the street. Then up from the cinema, the streaming came, the online streams, the Iroko TV. Iroko TV is mainly in Nigerian, then before Netflix came in. So that became like the release channel to go from the cinema and then maybe back to Iroko TV. And the fact that it had made it to the cinema give you a better deal with the online stream.
Mm-hmm.
So the cinema becomes like the marker of quality. So to say if it has been in the cinema, then would pay more. The online streaming platform would pay more attention to you. Yeah, but I
Oh.
guess it wasn't easy going into the cinemas. The filmmakers would say that it's so hard getting into the cinema to get the distributors to get you into the cinema. You
Mm-hmm.
have to have all of these big actors, the big
Yeah.
popular faces on it, and then certain standard are enforced in terms of quality. You have to shoot on some kind of quality. The
Mm-hmm.
sound has to be good. So for them, it became like a learning curve, unlike what for the DVD market is about the stories, about the faces. But now for the cinema, they have to pay more attention to the quality of the film.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so it goes down to online, then from online to the cable. But uh, often you have distributors, for cinema release. Then thereafter, the filmmaker still has to make his way to get to the online, to get to the cable. So the filmmaker is mainly involved at every junction. It's not
Mm.
well developed that you just get a distributor who would map out the whole release plan for you.
Right.
You hardly get that. So the filmmaker is always involved.
It also sounds like there is a strong can-do spirit among the Nigerians in making films.
I absolutely believe it to be true. Uh, I've I've seen a lot of people do, something you consider crazy, like sell off your property, ask family members for funding just to make this film. So I've
Mm.
seen a lot of passionate attempts put into making film. In a recent conversation with a filmmaker, Omoni Oboli, she mentioned that while trying to make her first film, that she told her entire family, everybody bring out your savings. They used everything, children's school
Wow.
fees, whatever they could lay their hands on, and then she used it to make the film. So you see people being that passionate. And
Yeah.
I think yes, that's really it for the industry. You have a lot of people who are saying, I must do this, I can't do this. And then because I think because they're not following this model of this corporate model, and probably also, if you get that educated in filmmaking, you probably will not make a film because you would want to follow the conventions. The convention is expensive to follow, but because these people are not as much educated in that form, in that formal kind of education. So it's like, I want it, I go for it, and they've seen
Yeah.
their predecessors getting it that way. I tell you,
Uh,
the only way to make a film is to make a film. So you just have to
yeah.
make that. You
Yeah.
just have to make that film. Yeah. So
Yeah. I think
there's a
there's
great
something
chance.
to be said for that. If you were just to go out and make a film with whatever you had, the experience itself of making that film would be of more value to you as an education than
Than a film
working
school.
your way slowly up the ladder for everything. I think that
Mhm.
at least to develop the filmmaker. So you have a special interest in Christian filmmaking, evangelical filmmaking.
Yeah, I often use the word evangelical to describe this because mainly most of the barely all the evangelical filmmakers I've talked to will tell you that they are in to preach the gospel
Mm.
using film. So for me, it's easy to just refer to it as evangelical because the motive is to preach,
Yes.
uh, yes, the gospel. And then they are often referred to as evangelist or drama minister,
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of thing. So I've been watching this film since growing up. Growing up, we watch them on VHS or sometimes church crusade ground. You'd we have a film show. It could be a 3 days crusade, then there'll be a day for film show, and of course that day we register the most attendance of all
Yeah.
whenever there's a film show. So that's
Mm-hmm.
my first encounter. Then sometimes on the Nigerian television, you would see these films coming up, maybe for Easter, Christmas, So we'd see them occasionally during Christian festivities.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2012, when I started my PhD, I decided to study these films. Of course, I was interested in just how female women are represented in the film.
Mm.
But but when I in 2016, okay, so I decided to go for this ethnographic field work. I stayed in the camp for 2 weeks, and then I became blown away. I
Mm.
became blown away by the intensity. I would never have believed that you have this level of organization behind these things that I've been seeing. I had
Mm.
acquired over, as at that time, I've acquired over 50 titles of the DVD, just watching them. But seeing the people behind the screen, I appreciated the act
Mm.
all the more. They are very passionate people. For them, it is a calling. They are as passionate as a
Right.
minister who is on the pulpit. So
Mm.
this medium was just a way to express for them their faith and to strengthen those in that faith, or either to evangelize, to bring people, to convince people to that faith. So I discovered they have better structure, I would say, than the mainstream
Oh.
yes, film industry. They meet regularly, they would meet like officially twice a year. Okay, so this camp, let me go back. This camp is a training camp for people who feels that they are called to preach using the film medium.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, so they'll have 2 weeks training in all. They'll have, I think they call it ordinary certificate and then the diploma. So but it's all is in 2 weeks. Everything is in 2 weeks. But you have to camp there. You camp there. You have time for class. You have time for lunch, breakfast. You have fellowship time. And then within that 2 weeks, you stage a play. At first, it used to be the play because that was their medium. At
Mm.
first, the stage. Then eventually, it became a film. So within that 2 weeks, you shoot, you shoot a film, you edit, and then you premiere right there before the class. And so, uh, yes, it is interesting on many levels because some people will come in there with zero knowledge about film. All they have is a passion, to
Mm-hmm.
make films, and then they'll go back. Sometimes a filmmaker,
Yeah.
because because they'll have one credit or the other to their name. Then there's this network, a strong network we'd have built, having spent 2 weeks with some people. You sleep together, they have hostels, you have shared that common space, and then you learn. So there's a lot of exchange going on. Some people come there with probably just knowledge of editing, mainly using the Adobe software since it's kind of easy
Yeah.
to use. Yes. So and then before you leave, you'd have taught somebody, one or two people, how to do that too. Some will come with their church cameras, and that would help, in shooting this thing. So they just pool resources together, and then they make things happen. Of course, prototype of the entire industry of just pooling resources informal, resources together, and then you make your film happen. So it's that same kind of spirit, but here I think they are at advantage because of the church connection. There is a this camp is not denominational, it's interdenominational, it's not belonging to a particular denomination, but you have people coming from all walks, all kind of churches down there, and then they have resources back home. Either you readily have cast, you have drama group members who are willing to work for God, so they don't see it as we are actors, so they don't go through all of these contracts, signing some actors contracts, because they see it as we are here, we want to work for God. So what will you have us do in this ministry? And so they would offer themselves to be on your set, and then they could get maybe cameras, tripod, basic light equipment from the church, because most churches have a media setup. These days we have nearly all the churches streaming online also. Thanks to the COVID, even those who weren't started, they have to they had to stream online. So I think all of these resources is made available for the evangelicals because of the nature. People who sponsor sees it as sponsoring the work of God.
Wow.
I think even the first production that became more like our first indigenous Christian films, that I would see, is with Mike Bamiloye. He's the most prominent evangelical filmmaker in Nigeria. And then he started way back 1985. He had just finished from the College of Education then, and had members from who are mainly students. And then they started this whole thing. And in 1986, they attempted making 2 films on VHS. One was rejected by the broadcasting station they took it to for poor quality. The other they never edited, and so they went back to producing stage. Then in 1990, they made their first film, and that would be because they had staged this play in a church, and then the then general overseer told them that he would sponsor it to become a video that they could show on the Nigerian television station at the time. So same play, The Unprofitable Servant. They had to go back to shoot it, and then they took it to the Nigerian television station. I think we all saw it Easter that year. We all saw it Easter that year. Of course, we didn't know the background. Is when I started researching that, and I got to understand, how all of that came to be. But that was their own background. But from the audience point of view, before then, we would see okay, you said the independent Christian films from the US. I think Pilgrim's Progress was one of those things that we saw then on our screen. Then we'll see these animations of Bible stories. So it was with this Mount Zion film that we started seeing indigenous story told. And then the motive was either to bring you to the knowledge of Christ or to encourage your faith, whichever is the case. So they opened up that space, and one fantastic thing that I think Bamiloye did was not just making films. I think 1992 or 1994, he started this training, the Christian drama training. So they opened one institute. They call it Mount Zion Christian Institute. And then, so that became another important thing that he did, because with this institute, he was able to raise people of like mind. And then today, I've lost count of the Christian filmmaking outfit that you have. I can't keep up to the titles that keep popping up on YouTube. Yes, you
Yeah.
have so much. And you hardly will find one person who had not attended the Mount Zion uh, Christian Film Institute at one
Oh,
point or the other. So now you have a lot. And because of that collaboration and networking that they have among themselves, they are really doing a lot because people would just trade in talent for free. I would
right.
owe you favor at some point and then we bring it all back and the film is made. So it becomes, I think, more easy for them to produce that thing. Mondial itself, they would have close to 200 titles. Yes, and then you have others who are making all kinds of films. Some mainly for their church, for church crusades or church outreaches that will travel to some neighboring countries and then show this film.
Mm,
They have their films spread around Ghana, Cameroon, Benin Republic, Kenya, Zimbabwe. They only have not made films in these areas, but they've also raised filmmakers.
mm,
So before they would make a film with these people, they would give them some sort of training because for them it is important to make that distinction to say this is not just entertainment, this is uh, preaching, this is reaching out to people. So you yourself have to be a vessel. So they'll have intensive Bible studies, prayer
mm.
meetings, and then uh, basic teaching on the act, uh,
That's
the
great.
act of acting,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, then provides a lot, converting church to cinemas. And this is interesting because at the time that the cinema became a big thing again in Nigeria, the Christian filmmakers could not access that because they do not have what the cinemas would refer to as A-list. And there was this deliberate policy by the Christian filmmakers not to use the secular, that's what they would refer to it, the secular actors, because for them, they are not ministers, so they are entertainers. And they are careful on who to use because they treat this act as sacrosanct. For them, this it must be a clean vessel,
Hmm.
a clean vessel must bear this message. And because they would not use this A list, of course, they had no shot with the cinemas. And so they would convert a church would become a makeshift cinema. They would block off the window, box it off, and then make it dark and all of that kind of cinema experience. I remember on one occasion it was a Saturday night, Saturday evening, and then they screened three films all at a go, no free, no gate, no gate takings, and then they
Hmm.
served popcorn and
Wow.
you mainly use the church projector and the church sound system to screen these films. And so,
The Christian filmmaking, the evangelical filmmaking in your industry, what percentage of that accounts for the larger Nigerian film industry?
it's hard to put a figure,
But is
but
it accepted? Because in the United States, the faith-based movement, it's sort of on the fringe. And
mm,
a lot of Christian filmmakers, they won't leave their secular professions to do anything in the faith-based movement because it's sort of like putting a nail in the coffin of your career if you start doing
mm, mm,
Christian film. So it's not really accepted in the mainstream. It's just not really looked at as a viable genre.
I think we have. I think on some terms the very opposite going on here
Mm,
because uh, the mainstream Nollywood try to buy into Pentecostal content a lot.
mm,
They buy into Christian content a lot because you have a large Christian oriented audience
mm.
watching their films. So sometimes an outsider would tell me that I can't tell it apart. I can't tell these so-called evangelical films apart from the mainstream because the mainstream would
Okay.
all before now the mainstream will always find a way to have like a Christian resolution. At the end, there's going
Okay.
to they'll probably just impose a pastor into the storyline. You won't know where that is coming from. That may not build up, it may not add up with the story, but you just see the pastor coming in to pray, and then whatever it is resolved through the prayers of the pastor. And that's because they just want to buy into that audience. They know that majority of their audience have Christian orientation, and then to appeal to the audience, they would resolve things that way. And there's this cliche at the end of at the end credit, it starts